Activists say the commitment by G7 countries to start burning coal by 2035 is not enough as the world grapples with the effects of climate change. While the setting of the phase-out date for the use of coal is welcome news, some activists fear the sluggish progress in reversing the impact of climate change across the globe. To discuss this, I'm joined by Monique Roux, who's Chief Energy Engineer from Stellenbosch University. Monique, appreciate your time this afternoon. How feasible is it for the G7 countries to phase out coal energy by 2035? And what are some of the challenges that they might face in achieving this goal?
Good afternoon, Hugo. Thank you for the question. Yes, I think if you look at the G7 countries, they are much further developed than compared to Africa and South Africa in terms of the energy generation. And they also currently use a lot less coal compared to South Africa. So for them, they're looking at around 15 to 30% of coal power that's generated from coal power. So for them, it probably would be attainable to start phasing back on coal generation, and they could probably, with some incentives and heavy capital investment into new generation technologies, reach their goal of having coal phased out completely by 2035.
Is there political will to push towards this goal by 2035, do you think?
I think so. I mean, it depends obviously heavily on the government. We've seen in Germany, who recently had a greener government, coalition with the Green Party, and in Europe as well, where there were governments that were very heavily involved in getting targets and emissions down, and then having incentives and having a lot of the budget invested into getting new generation online that's cleaner and less carbon emissions. So if there is political will, it probably can get done. I just want to iterate that it does cost a lot of money. This transition to cleaner energy is very intensive in terms of investment that needs to get made by governments, and it is very expensive. If you look at the total amount of investment globally that's been made, it's absolutely staggering and astonishing. And I think for those countries to reach those large last bit of goals, it is going to be hugely expensive for them to transition to a completely clean energy mix.
Monique, the two parts to this equation, if you will, the one part obviously is moving away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. But there's also a conversation now around reversing the impacts of global warming. Just how is that in particular being dealt with?
So there are interesting technologies that are sort of being developed, and it would be interesting to see how that is going to mature going into the future. But one of them is carbon capture, where it would make sense to not completely move away from a energy mix there where you've got carbon emitting technologies, which is really difficult and really expensive, but then looking at capturing the carbon in the atmosphere, and that way moving towards net zero. So those technologies are still quite new and at its infancy, so it's still very much everyone's question whether that is going to be fully developed and something that can be used in future. And then we're also looking a lot at green hydrogen at the moment, where that could play a very pivotal role in the future towards getting energy and energy security into your system. But also it's very difficult to say whether that will mature and whether it will be able to be a feasible pathway towards meeting our climate goals. And then in terms of reversing the effects of it, we do not go into specifics of how temperatures can be brought down, but everyone's consensus is that if you can limit the carbon in the atmosphere, temperatures should come down, and there would be a stabilizing effect in the environment.
So let's talk about the role of renewable energy. How significant is its role in this transition processes? What are the challenges and opportunities in scaling up renewable energy?
So that's always very interesting. It depends usually on who you talk to about it. Some people feel, and there are lots of activists in Europe and even in South Africa, lots of organizations who feel that we should move to 100% renewable energy mix, where all our energy gets generated from renewable energy sources like wind and solar, and We don't have any reliance on fossil fuel, no reliance on coal power, no reliance on natural gas, and specifically also no reliance on on nuclear energy. So there are some that believe that that is attainable. What we're looking at, we're saying that that is going to be incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive to have a completely renewable energy mix. So probably something that would be more feasible is looking at a mix where you've got some gas and then more of a reliance on nuclear energy to get a cleaner energy mix. But we feel it would be very difficult and very expensive to have a completely 100% renewable energy mix.
And I suppose the irony is we talk about the expense of this, we're referring to the G7 countries, and these are the most developed and some of the richest economies in the world. How does all this pan out for countries like South Africa, never mind the rest of the African continent?
Absolutely. So our research is focused a lot on what does it mean to get renewable energy onto the system. And if you look at the targets that's been made and sort of the gains that's been made, it's been quite easy to get around 20-30% of renewables onto your system because your system's geared towards that. But if you're looking at anything past 50% of renewables on your system, then you need to re-engineer your whole system. So your whole grid, everything around that needs to get rebuilt. And that is a lot of capital investment that needs to go in there. And then also due to the fact that renewable energy is very variable, you always need that backup energy sources, whether that means you're going to have a whole lot of batteries on your system, which is also incredibly expensive, or have a lot of backup gas, which is also expensive to run due to the fact that natural gas is an expensive source. But we can't see how you're going to run a system with a large amount of renewables on it for a cheap price, essentially.
So with the G7 countries pushing for 2035 as a move away from fossil fuels such as coal, is there an equal amount of pressure on Africa, or does Africa have a little bit more time to achieve this goal? It is it's almost 10 years, just a little over 10 years.
Yeah, that's also a very interesting question, and also usually depends on who you speak to. Some of the European countries and the activists, they feel that they should do more in Europe because they are more developed, and they've also historically contributed way more than Africa towards total greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere and the effect that had on Earth. If you look at South Africa, in terms of the global percentage, our energy generation is very small. If you compare that to China, it's completely it is very small. So there should be some leniency towards more developing nations in terms of allowing us to develop our energy sources, in terms of getting secure energy supply, because that is really what we need to get our economy up and going, to get jobs secured. So whether that is going to be allowed or not, there is definitely pressure on South Africa. We've had to make commitments in terms of the Paris Agreement. We've had to make commitments at COP28, and it's integrated into our IRP, our Integrated Resource Plan, into our JET IRP. All of those plans have got pathways towards how we're going to generate cleaner energy sources. So there is definitely pressure on us. Whether that's going to pan out and whether it would be financially attainable for South Africa to do that is still very much an open question.
So where is Africa's voice in all of this? Because Africa's receiving the brunt of some of these challenges. If we take a look at a country like Kenya or much of East Africa at the moment, you know, there's so much that's happening in terms of global warming and the effects. Floods in Kenya have killed over 200 people, and we can talk about the rest of the African continent, the El Nino drought in parts of southern Africa and the implications that it has. Where is Africa's voice? Is it commensurate with the punishment and the toll that has been taken via global warming, which is largely caused by most of those developed countries?
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I think that we should stand up and have a voice for Africa, because I feel we are definitely, as you say, we're bearing the brunt of what's happened historically in terms of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. And then we also having this being placed this undue burden on our shoulders to transition to a renewable energy future, which is very expensive and which doesn't completely align always with the natural resources that are available in Africa, and is not attainable for countries where we're still busy developing our energy mix. So I think probably Africa would have to find their feet in this and have to stand strong in terms of how they want to develop. I know that some of the Central African countries, if you look at their total energy mix, it's very small. Some of those countries have got a total of 1,000 megawatts, which is their total demand in the country, which is like a drop in the bucket of what China or what the European Union is generating, and to allow them to do what they need to do that. I know that there are countries that are in Central Africa and in Southern Africa that's looking at nuclear energy development. And then we've got Europe standing on the sides preaching to Africa to say that you shouldn't do that. They shouldn't be allowed to do that. They should do just completely renewables, which it's going to be difficult for their systems to handle. So I think we probably need to have very strong policies in place. We need to develop our research. We need to have our research goals and our energy pathways worked out. And for that, we need a strong IRP. We need a good guideline, a good framework for South Africa to say that this is what we're going to do and this is how much it's going to cost, and decide whether that's attainable for the country and for the continent.